It was 1 in the morning when my phone lit up on my nightstand, vibrating so hard it nearly slid off the edge. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the moment I picked up, my mother's voice exploded through the speaker, high, frantic, breathless. "Brooke, wake up! Your sister is at the hospital right now. Send $25,000 immediately or she'll be stuck suffering all night and they'll bill her for every minute." Before I could process anything, my dad grabbed the phone. His tone was sharp, irritated, almost commanding. "Don't argue. Just transfer the money. Right now." I sat up, heart pounding, not from panic, but from something colder. Because I'd heard this tone too many times, the urgency, the pressure, the demand disguised as a crisis. Except this time, something felt wrong. My parents weren't saying what actually happened. They weren't mentioning why Mia was even there. And they definitely weren't mentioning Evan, their golden son, who somehow was never available during these emergencies. I took a slow breath, staring at the ceiling in the dark, and answered with the calmest voice I'd ever used with them. "Call your golden son." There was a sharp inhale on the other end, like my mom couldn't believe she heard me correctly. I didn't wait for whatever guilt trip she was about to launch into. I hung up, powered off my phone completely, and let the apartment fall silent again as I lay back down. I had no idea those 10 words would trigger a chain reaction so wild that the police would be calling me the next morning with information that tore every lie my family ever told straight open. But we'll get there. Before we do, I'm Brooke Ellison, 30 years old, and somehow the youngest kid in the family who's expected to clean up every disaster my siblings create. If you've ever been treated like the responsible one just because you finally got your life together, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. The next morning, when the sunlight filtered through the curtains and warmed the side of my face, I reached for my phone with the vague thought that I should check the time. The screen was still dark. I had powered it off the night before. And for a few seconds, the quiet in my apartment felt strange, like my life had paused somewhere between that late-night call and this calm, bright morning. As I turned the phone on and set it aside to boot up, a familiar weight settled in my chest, the kind that came from years of understanding exactly how my family operated. Nothing about last night had surprised me except maybe the fact that for the first time I had said no. There were 3 of us. Evan Walker, 34, the oldest, and the one my parents treated like a prize they couldn't afford to lose, no matter how many reckless choices he made. Mia Walker, 28, the middle child who lived impulsively and counted on everyone else to absorb the fallout. And me, Brooke Ellison, 30 years old, the youngest, supposedly the easiest to rely on because I kept my life organized and stayed out of trouble. People outside the family always assumed the youngest got spoiled, but in our house, the youngest was the one who filled gaps, fixed problems, and made sacrifices without being asked. Evan was the first person I ever financially rescued. Right after college, he launched a tech startup that crashed almost instantly, leaving him with a pile of debt collectors calling at all hours. One afternoon, he showed up at my place pale and panicked, begging me to cover part of his debt so they'd stop threatening legal fees. I didn't earn much at the time, but I gave him the money because he was my brother and because my parents kept repeating that he just needed another chance. They didn't blame him for the mess. They praised me for being responsible. Mia had her own way of pulling me in. She decided she wanted to be a makeup artist, paid a deposit for a program in Los Angeles she couldn't afford, and then called me sobbing when the school demanded the remaining tuition. My parents treated it like a crisis I was obligated to solve, insisting she had potential and that supporting her dreams was the right thing to do. I paid the rest of the tuition, helped her move, and even bought her the tools she said were required. She thanked me with a single Instagram post and then skipped half her classes because she preferred doing makeup at the beach for photos. My parents weren't any different. A few years ago, they maxed out multiple credit cards on home projects and holiday shopping, and when they admitted they were drowning in interest, I stepped in to help them clear the balance. They promised they would handle their finances better. Within months, they applied for a new card telling me it was temporary. When I questioned them, my mother gave me that soft, familiar look and said, "Brooke, the youngest, should know how to think for her brother and sister. You're the one who understands responsibility." Every time she said that, something inside me pulled tighter. Moving out had been my attempt to create space to stop feeling like my entire adult life revolved around fixing problems other people created, but distance didn't stop them from calling whenever money was involved. Alone here, a bill there, a sudden emergency that never sounded like a real emergency, always presented as just this one time. My phone finally lit up with notifications as it finished booting a long list waiting for me, but I didn't reach for it. Whatever messages were there weren't new. They were simply the delayed result of a pattern my family had relied on for years, a pattern I had finally broken the night before. 2 days before the 1 a.m. call, Evan invited Mia and a guy named Chase Whitfield to take a short getaway to Phoenix, framing it as a simple chance to reset after a stressful month. Chase Whitfield, whom I had only heard about in passing, came from a prominent real estate family in Arizona and was the kind of person who grew up around country clubs and rooftop lounges, so it didn't surprise me that the trip escalated almost immediately once the three of them arrived. From the moment they checked in, their social media feeds turned into a non-stop reel of luxury clips. The first video I saw was Evan walking into a high-end desert resort, panning across a lobby decorated with stone sculptures and oversized chandeliers. Then Mia appeared on screen, tossing her hair and spinning with a drink in hand, tagging the resort's spa with captions about spiritual detox and finally treating herself. Later that afternoon, the three of them posted from a rooftop bar overlooking the Phoenix skyline, each holding cocktails with neon garnishes that probably cost more than a normal lunch. In one story, Chase adjusted the camera and introduced himself like an influencer, bragging about their desert escape and shouting out the hotel staff, hinting that they were taking care of everything and then some. I kept scrolling, telling myself it wasn't my business, but the videos kept coming in waves. Mia showing off a new designer bag, Evan posing beside a rented sports car, the three of them cheering over champagne at a private cabana near the pool. Every clip had the same energy, excess confidence, no sense of limitation. When they moved into the suite, Mia took a slow video of the room, gliding the camera across the marble counters and the panoramic windows that overlooked the mountains. She zoomed in on the welcome basket, joked about how she deserved this level of luxury, and then posted a close-up of the bathroom mirror while wearing a silk robe she clearly hadn't packed from home. Evan uploaded a shot of himself dropping the keys of a convertible onto a glass table, saying something about needing a real ride for the weekend. Chase filmed a montage of them driving through the desert, the top-down music blasting, Evan in the passenger seat shouting, laughing commentary over the wind. That night, Chase went live from a party in one of the resort's private lounges. The music was loud, the lighting dim, and the table in front of them was covered with high-end drinks. People in the comments started asking who was paying for everything, and Chase laughed it off, saying, "We've got it handled," but never clarified who he was. The next morning, a different kind of post appeared, a screenshot sent to Mia from the resort staff stating that Evan had damaged a decorative wall piece in the suite and spilled a bottle of expensive liquor onto a specialty rug. The message explained that there would be charges applied to the card on file. Mia responded with a nervous laugh, trying to downplay it in her story as minor stuff, but the tone in her voice didn't match the caption. A few hours later, I noticed something that made my stomach tense: scattered notifications of questionable transactions from my parents' shared account appearing on their own stories, a screenshot of a declined purchase, a photo of a receipt that didn't match any name I recognized, and a brief clip of Evan awkwardly covering the camera when Chase joked about unexpected bills landing in the wrong place. It wasn't clear what had happened, but something about the timing felt wrong. I watched their stories one more time, felt a wave of unease rise in my chest, and then set my phone aside, telling myself to ignore it. I didn't want to get pulled into another disaster. even though a quiet part of me already knew something bigger was unraveling behind the scenes. The night of the call, I had been asleep for barely an hour when my phone lit up with a vibration so sharp it rattled across the nightstand. I grabbed it without thinking, still half tangled in my blankets, and the moment I answered, I heard a kind of frantic breathing I recognized instantly. It was my mother, Karen Ellison, her voice high and uneven, as if she was choking on every word. "Brooke, you have to wake up. Mia is at the hospital and she needs immediate evaluation. They won't continue anything until we pay, and she's in so much pain. Please, sweetheart, we need $25,000 right now." Her tone wasn't just urgent. It was panic to the point where each syllable cracked. I pushed myself upright, blinking toward the dark window, and asked what happened, but Karen dodged the question like she hadn't even heard it. "There's no time for explanations," she insisted, the words coming in trembling bursts. "Just send it. They said they won't move forward without payment." "Brooke, please, she can't wait." A rustling noise followed, and then my father appeared on the line, his voice louder and more forceful than hers. "Brooke, this isn't a discussion. Transfer the money. I don't care how late it is, your sister needs help." He wasn't shouting, but the pressure in his tone felt like a command more than a plea, as if he believed raising his voice slightly would make me comply out of habit. I asked again what exactly had happened to Mia, why she suddenly needed that kind of money in the middle of the night. But neither of them would answer. Karen only repeated that Mia was in distress, that the hospital needed the funds before they allowed further evaluation, and that I was the only one reliable enough to get it done. Then she dissolved into hiccuped sobs that sounded suspiciously rehearsed, like she knew which buttons to press and how hard to press them. A familiar knot formed in my stomach, the same knot I had felt countless times when my parents called me during moments of emergencies that later turned out to be disasters they either caused or enabled. I could hear the desperation thickening in Karen's breathing, the impatience rising in my father's tone, and the eerie absence of any clarification about why Mia was even at the hospital. Something in their voices didn't line up, a kind of frantic insistence that sounded less like concern and more like panic about getting caught in a lie. My father cut back in with a low growl of frustration, saying, "Brooke, don't make this harder. You know your sister can't handle this on her own. Stop asking questions and just help your family." His attempt to guilt-trip me felt heavy, familiar, and mechanical. I stared at the dim digits on my alarm clock, 1:03 a.m., and felt a strange calm settle over me. For years, every time they pulled this tactic, I bent, I caved, I paid. Not tonight. I kept my voice steady when I answered. "No, I'm not sending anything." Karen gasped like the world had dropped out beneath her. "Brooke, how could you say that? She needs you. We're begging you." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I simply repeated the same refusal, firmer this time. "I'm not paying. You need to ask Evan." The line fell silent for a few beats, heavy and trembling, before Karen finally whispered, "Your brother can't help. You're the only one left. Brooke, please, don't do this to your family." But I had reached the point where the fear and guilt no longer outweighed the exhaustion. I said no. My father muttered something under his breath, sharp and disappointed, but I didn't let it pierce me the way it used to. The panic, the pressure, the scripted emotional collapse. It all felt like a performance I had seen too many times. I ended the call without hesitation, set the phone face down on the bed, and let the quiet of the room settle around me like a wall between their chaos and my sanity. The next morning, the moment I turned my phone back on the screen, lit up with such an overwhelming flood of alerts that it looked like the device was short-circuiting. Notifications stacked faster than I could swipe them away, missed calls from unknown numbers, dozens of messages from group chats I barely remembered being in, and a ridiculous amount of DMs, all demanding my attention at once. My stomach tightened as I opened the social media app, and the very first thing I saw was a freshly posted video from Mia. She had positioned herself in a hospital hallway with the camera angled just enough to show the background without revealing anything specific, giving the impression of urgency without providing details. Her eyes glistened as she said, "I'm here alone trying to stay strong, and my sister refused to help me when I needed her the most. I'm asking everyone watching this, don't stay silent." Her voice wavered at the end, like she'd practiced the emotional break. She didn't mention why she was there or how things had escalated, only that I had turned my back on her. The caption below the video read, "Sometimes the person you expect the most from is the one who lets you down." I barely had time to process the clip before another notification popped up this time, a story from Evan. He had uploaded a photo of the two of them on a family vacation years ago with a text overlay that said, "Real family shows up." That's all I'll say. He didn't need to tag me. The passive-aggressive tone made it obvious who the message was aimed at. More comments appeared beneath both posts every second, and although I didn't click into them, I saw enough previews to know people were piling on without understanding anything. Some strangers wrote vague accusations, others mirrored whatever emotion Mia projected, and a few simply chimed in because they enjoyed the drama. My DMs were full of messages from acquaintances, coworkers, and people I hadn't spoken to in years. Many included phrases like, "Is this true?" or "Why wouldn't you help her?" as if they were entitled to answers. I backed out of the app hoping the texts would be less chaotic, but my messaging screen was another disaster. Two new messages from my parents landed right at the top of the thread. The first from my mom read, "Your sister was in pain all night and you didn't even try to help her. I don't understand you." A minute later, my dad sent, "This is not how we raised you. I'm disappointed beyond words." Neither asked how I was doing or whether I even knew the full situation. Their minds were already made up, their loyalty placed where it always went, toward the loudest, not the most truthful. More texts followed from relatives I barely interacted with, each one offering a variation of guilt shock or unsolicited advice. Calls buzzed through again, this time from private numbers, and I knew immediately they were from people who had no business involving themselves. The digital pressure felt relentless, a tidal wave crashing against the silence of my apartment. And yet, somewhere beneath all the noise, I felt strangely steady. Maybe because everything unfolding was predictable. Maybe because I had finally stopped letting manufactured urgency dictate my choices. Or maybe because the more the online noise grew, the clearer it became that none of them wanted the truth, they wanted a villain, and Mia had given them one. I placed the phone face down on the table, letting the notifications continue without interruption, and allowed the quiet inside my home to swallow the chaos outside it. Close to noon, an unfamiliar number from Arizona flashed on my screen, and I hesitated before answering, half expecting another stranger ready to lecture me about Mia. Instead, a calm voice introduced himself as Officer Marcus Delgado from the Scottsdale Police Department, saying he needed a few minutes of my time regarding an incident at the Desert Palms Resort. I stood still, the room falling into a quiet that felt heavier than the notifications earlier, and listened as he explained why he was calling. The first thing he clarified was that Mia was not in any kind of medical emergency. She wasn't in danger, she wasn't in critical condition, and she wasn't waiting for treatment. She had been evaluated briefly because resort security wanted to ensure she didn't have any injuries after a disruptive night, but she was stable and not experiencing anything that required emergency care. Officer Delgado moved on to what actually happened, choosing his words carefully. According to the report, Mia and her group had caused significant property damage during a late-night party inside their suite. A large decorative piece had been knocked over and shattered, and an expensive carpet had been ruined when someone spilled a bottle of wine across it during an argument. Resort management filed a claim and requested a security deposit of $25,000 to cover the damages before allowing the group to leave. This had nothing to do with medical fees, it was entirely related to the destruction inside the suite. I felt a mix of disbelief and a bitter sense of recognition as he continued. Chase Whitfield, the one who had invited them to Arizona, exited the resort shortly after the incident began, leaving Evan and Mia to deal with the fallout. Evan then attempted to fill out the temporary financial responsibility form, but instead of using his own name, he scribbled mine down without my knowledge or consent. Officer Delgado was clear this wasn't identity fraud, just a reckless decision where Evan signed the name of a relative, something the resort flagged because it didn't match the identification he presented earlier. When the resort attempted to contact Evan again that morning, he didn't respond. Instead, Mia became agitated, insisted she couldn't stay there any longer, and resort staff decided it was best to involve law enforcement to disentangle the situation. Officer Delgado then told me something I already suspected. Deep down, both of my parents were fully aware of the real reason the resort demanded the deposit. They had been informed about the property damage earlier that morning and knew this had nothing to do with medical bills or urgent care. Despite this, they contacted me and withheld the truth, framing the situation as a crisis to pressure me into paying. When Delgado finally paused and asked if I intended to take responsibility for the deposit or if I wished to communicate with the resort, the answer came to me without hesitation. I didn't raise my voice, didn't explain myself, didn't offer any justification. "I'm not involved," I told him plainly. "Please contact my parents. They can handle whatever needs to be handled." There was a brief silence on the line, the kind that suggested he wasn't surprised. He acknowledged my statement professionally, thanked me for my time, and ended the call. I set the phone down and let the truth settle over the chaos my family had created, a truth they had tried so hard to bury under panic and manipulation. In the week that followed, everything around the Ellison family began to unravel in slow motion each day, presenting a new consequence they had tried so hard to avoid. The Desert Palms Resort sent a formal compensation notice by email and certified mail, listing the exact value of the damaged decor, the ruined carpet, and the penalties for delays in payment. My mom and dad attempted to negotiate, explaining that they could only cover a fraction of the required amount, but the resort responded firmly with a deadline and a warning about additional fees if the balance remained unpaid. Their financial strain grew heavier by the day. Meanwhile, Evan faced his own fallout. A clip from Chase Whitfield's live stream showing Evan dancing on a table with a bottle in hand began circulating online after people connected it to Mia's earlier claims. His company called him in to meet with HR, wanting an explanation for the behavior and the association with a highly publicized resort incident. Evan tried to downplay everything, insisting it was taken out of context, but the HR department placed him on suspension while they reviewed the footage and the related reports. 2 days later, they notified him that his employment was terminated due to conduct misaligned with company standards. He left the office carrying a cardboard box, stunned that one weekend in Arizona had cost him his job. Mia's situation escalated as well. After her release from the resort, management issued a written directive requiring her to complete a behavioral recovery program designed to address reckless conduct on private property. She was also told she must cover the program costs herself, and that failure to complete it would result in a permanent ban from all properties owned by the same hospitality group. The civil repercussions for my parents arrived shortly afterward. Since Evan had signed my name on the temporary financial responsibility form, and because my parents later attempted to negotiate without disclosing the full situation, the resort filed a civil claim against the Ellison family for inaccurate documentation and failure to meet agreed payment timelines. Panic drove my parents to bombard my phone with calls and messages, each one more desperate than the last. They begged for help, begged for understanding, begged for money, begged for me to fix this like I always did. I didn't respond to a single attempt. I blocked their numbers, blocked Mia, blocked Evan, and for the first time in years, my phone felt quiet in a way that made my apartment feel bigger. As the truth spread among people who had initially sided with Mia, the sympathy she had enjoyed began to evaporate. Some who commented on her earlier video deleted their posts. Others stopped replying to her completely, and a few even reached out to say they had spoken to the officers involved and understood the real situation. Evan's friends distanced themselves after seeing the HR outcome, and Mia's acquaintances steadily faded away. At home, the family tension grew unbearable. Evan accused Mia of manipulating the situation and dragging him into it, saying, "None of this would have happened if she hadn't blown things out of proportion." Mia lashed back, claiming Evan had caused everything the second he wrote my name on that form. My parents oscillated between defending one and scolding the other, creating a loop of conflict that left the entire house in constant turmoil. While their world spun out of control, I spent my evenings packing boxes in my living room, sorting through old belongings, preparing to move to a new apartment on the other side of the city. Every folded towel, every sealed box felt like another step away from the chaos I had grown up with. For the first time, the distance didn't feel like abandonment, it felt like freedom. The weeks slipped quietly into months, and the distance Brooke had created around herself settled into something steady, almost peaceful. She had traded the constant noise of her old life for a city whose streets didn't recognize her name, and whose skyline felt like an open page waiting to be written on. Her new job, a position she had earned without anyone's intervention or expectations, provided a grounding rhythm she had never known before, and each morning she walked to work with a sense of calm that surprised her. She had changed her number, moved her belongings into a modest but bright apartment, and rebuilt her routines without the weight of her family's demands pressing against her. In this new chapter, silence wasn't frightening. It was freedom. While she found her footing again, the world she had left behind shifted uneasily without her. Evan and Mia, once cushioned by endless excuses and the certainty that someone else would handle the fallout, were confronted by responsibilities they had never learned to manage. Without Brooke to lean on or to blame, they were forced to deal with the financial chaos they had contributed to. The calls for help, once daily and desperate, eventually faded into nothing when they realized no one on the other end would pick them up. Karen and Mark, bound to the legal commitments they had made, could no longer deflect accountability or push it on to someone more convenient. Their attempts to regain control had dissolved the moment Brooke stepped away, leaving them to confront the consequences they had insisted were someone else's burden. What remained was the truth. They had spent years avoiding their youngest child, was no longer willing to carry the weight of their choices. As the seasons changed, Brooke felt a quiet transformation settling inside her. For the first time in her adult life, she went entire days without checking her phone out of fear, without anticipating a crisis that wasn't hers, without bracing for the next demand disguised as family love. She found herself laughing more easily, sleeping more deeply, and allowing her world to expand beyond the narrow expectations she had once been trapped in. Her co-workers became friends who saw her as an equal, not a resource. Her apartment evolved from a temporary refuge into a home filled with small, deliberate joys, fresh flowers on the counter, a soft throw blanket she actually liked, a stack of books she finally had time to read. She no longer flinched at unexpected knocks or unknown numbers. Her life was finally her own. Looking back, she understood the lesson she wished someone had told her years earlier. Boundaries are not cruelty, and protecting your peace is not abandonment. Family, when it demands everything and gives nothing, is not love, it is extraction. And choosing to walk away is not betrayal, it is survival. She had spent years believing that being the youngest meant she owed more, that her value came from absorbing damage so others didn't have to. But standing alone in her new city with no one pulling at her edges or draining her spirit, she understood how false that belief had always been. Loving yourself is not selfish. Cutting off those who harm you is not heartless. And no one child, sibling, or otherwise is obligated to sacrifice their well-being to uphold the illusion of a family that refuses to grow. Brooke had not just left, she had reclaimed her life. And for the first time, she was free.